Buckle up. It's time for the Champions of Cinema podcast.
Welcome, sports fans, to the ultimate cinematic arena. I'm your host, Joe Walker, and this is the Champions of Cinema podcast. Fellow producer James Marshall and I are diving deep into the heart-pounding world of sports films, the victories, the defeats, and the unforgettable moments that make us cheer, cry, and believe in the power of the underdog. It's Season 2, Episode 8, and time for what some people consider is the greatest sports movie of all time. What are 5 reasons why people should watch Raging Bull, James?
Well, it's a perfect story about a violent and tortured character.
It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and won 2.
It's ranked as the 4th greatest American movie of all time by AFI, just behind Citizen Kane, Godfather, and Casablanca.
It pairs De Niro and Pesci in the first iteration of their epic run.
And the movie arguably saved the career of Martin Scorsese.
So, James, before we get started on that, it's our usual question of asking, what have you been watching?
Well, I have watched something. In fact, I watched something very new in the cinema, Joe. I watched, what would you call it, the reboot or the long-awaited sequel? Surprise sequel?
Long-awaited sequel.
Long-awaited sequel. Was it obvious from the first one the sequel was going to come out? Not sure.
Apparently there was always going to be a sequel.
Okay, fair enough. Because, and that sequel was Gladiator 2 by Ridley Scott. It's really good. Have you seen it yet?
Well, yeah, we went together, James. So, yeah, of course I've seen it.
Did you see it? Were we? Oh, yeah. Oh, of course you were there. Yeah. Oh, how could I forget? Yeah. And a sports film. So we'll see what happens later on. We'll see if we revisit it.
I really want to cover those 2 films at some point in the near future. I watched a classic movie, actually, yesterday. Well, I say classic, but definitely classic for you, because it's pre-you being born. I watched the 1996 or 97 movie, 12 Monkeys, yesterday.
I've watched 12 Monkeys. It's a weird
one.
In
Bed Ill.
It's a very weird
movie.
film.
Which is what you're going to get with any Terry Gilliam movie is going to be strange.
Yeah, I've not met anyone who's ever watched 12 Monkeys before, because it's not really a cult. It's not quite cult classic.
It was a cult classic for me in my teenage years.
Okay,
it was possibly between me and my best friend of that time. It was possibly our most quoted movie. However, James, we can't go on talking about just the general twaddle that we've been watching all week, because we have both watched something very significantly important to the world of sports film and cinema over the past week, and that is this week's movie, which is 1980s Raging Bull, which should hopefully have been an amazing watch for you and been a watch for you as a first-time watcher.
Yes.
Been something that maybe was a bit quite formative in your movie watching experience. I'm not sure.
It was a tough watch. It's kind of like I don't think I've watched a film that essentially, like, for the entirety of it, I was kind of on edge for. Uncut Gems, maybe. That's quite an on edge film. A lot,
Similar feeling, yeah.
But I'd say on Uncut Gems, because it's Sandler, it's a bit more. There's some entertainment bits in there. Whereas this is like, wow, it's hard to say I enjoyed it. It was amazing, and I think, and as we we'll talk about all the the great stuff in this film, but it was. I'm glad I watched it. However, it's not a film which I think I get it to the point where I'm not eagerly like, I can't wait to watch it again, because it's like, wow, that's intense.
Intense is sometimes good though, right?
Yes, this film is the yang to your Rocky's yin, essentially.
Very much so. Because Rocky is a love story, and this is a tragedy.
It's a tragedy, but in some ways, I feel like this is a more accurate representation of what boxing is.
Before we get any more into the dissection of this, can you give me a really sweet, simple Japanese haiku?
I'll try.
About what this movie is about.
Family in ring. Tasted sugar, it's not sweet. Never knocked me down.
I really like it. Yeah.
I struggled because it's hard. The haiku, you get 17 syllables, so it's like, to try and like narrow down on a certain area, but I feel like I kind of covered everything. I managed to squeeze in like we talked about like, we've been sharing certain edits and stuff, and it's like that never knocked me down, Ray. Which we'll talk a bit later on about. It just stays in my head. So, and then did you catch the tasted sugar?
Yes, absolutely. Sugar Ray Robinson,
exactly, and stuff like that. And then family and ring. There's like sort of two sides to this man and two challenges he has to face.
Okay, but before we do get there, I want to just treat you with a lovely quiz about some of the people that are involved in this movie. The movie was directed by Martin Scorsese. It's from 1980. The budget was $18 million. It earned $23 million. It's not a lot, James.
Wow, fuck.
This is one of the films that De Niro and Scorsese collaborated on. They actually collaborated on 9 other movies. Jesus. And I want to see if you can name only 3 of them. Just name 3 of them.
Just name 3. The Irishman.
Mm-hmm.
He's not in Goodfellas. Oh, he is in Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wait. We're talking about Pesci or De Niro?
De Niro. They're both in Goodfellas.
Okay. I need to watch Goodfellas again. Did he do one before Raging Bull? 3 before Raging Bull. Oh, God. He didn't do Meet the Parents, did he?
No, he didn't. Meet the Parents. Or Meet the Fuckers.
Or Meet the Fuckers. No. I'm throwing the towel.
That's okay. So, I think you did a valiant effort for a young...
I'll kick myself.
For your young moving over. I'm just going to read these out for you. Okay. So, the very first film they ever collaborated on was Mean Streets, which is New York-style gangster movie, but not necessarily in the gangster style that you know.
Don't know this one.
They did Taxi Driver, which was...
Oh! Right. Okay.
Possibly their first big break movie of the two of them. They then did a musical called New York, New York, which didn't do very well.
And actually, didn't know he did a musical.
That's what Scorsese thought had killed his career, and it was the movie before this one. And as a result of doing New York, New York, and it panning, Scorsese actually went on to have a cocaine overdose in 1978. And whilst in hospital recovering from that, De Niro went in and said to him, "Look, I'm not having you ruin your career. I'm not having you die over this shit. I want to do this movie." And he's like, "You've shown me this book 2 or 3 times, this Raging Bull book." He's like, "Yeah, I have, and I want to do it." So he says, "We're gonna get you clean. We're gonna get you sober, and we're gonna get you off the drugs, and we're gonna make this fucking movie." That's what De Niro said to Scorsese, and that's what they did. They made this movie, and it, in essence, saved Scorsese's career. I'm just going to finish off this list for you of collaborated movies. So they did The King of Comedy, which wasn't a huge success. Then they did Goodfellas. They did Cape Fear. They did Casino. They did The Irishman.
Casino.
And then they most recently did Killers of the Flower Moon together.
I don't know that one. That came out since The Irishman. Oh my Lord. Have I not heard of that? Fair enough.
That's top notch. This is a movie you need to go and watch. Just a couple of little bits for you. Yes, it didn't earn a lot financially, but it absolutely rinsed the Academy Awards. So it did really well with 8 nominations. And to be fair, some of the people who didn't win probably should have done. But ultimately, it's got an 8.1 IMDb rating, which is pretty high for IMDb. And it has a 92 on Rotten Tomatoes. So
pretty good.
Not bad at all when we're talking about movies.
Not as high as Transformers 1, but still 92 is respectable. It's not bad.
So we're going to talk through our 3-act structure of this movie, and we're going to see if we can break down the movie into its different acts and some of its main characters and some of its overall themes. And we're going to start off with Act 1, Rise of the Bull. Jake LaMotta, a Bronx-born boxer, fights his way up the ranks of a professional boxing during the 1940s. Fear and unrelenting in the... Jake LaMotta, a Bronx-born boxer, fights his way up the ranks of professional boxing during the 1940s. Fierce and unrelenting in the ring, Jake channels his inner rage to overpower opponents. Outside the ring, however, his life is turbulent. His marriage to his wife, Irma, is failing, and his volatile temper and paranoia create tension in his personal relationships, especially with his loyal but opportunistic brother and manager, Joey. Jake meets Vicky, a stunning young woman, and falls deeply in love, leaving Irma to pursue her. Jake's obsession with control and jealousy surfaces as he begins his relationship with Vicky, questioning her every move. As Jake climbs closer to a title shot, his insecurity and self-destructive tendencies start to overshadow his professional success. Talk to me a little bit about characters, James, and talk to me about Jake LaMotta.
So, Jake LaMotta, played by the mentioned Robert De Niro, is the central figure in Raging Bull. He's a man driven by a volatile mix of ambition, insecurity, and self-loathing, and his life is defined by conflict, both in the boxing ring and within his relationships. In the ring, Jake channels his inner rage into an unyielding fighting style, making him a formidable opponent. However, outside the ring, his inability to control that same anger leads to his downfall. Jake's insecurities manifest most clearly in his jealousy and obsession with control, and he's paranoid about his wife Vicky's fidelity, lashing out violently at those closest to him. His mistrust is not limited to Vicky, but also extends to his brother Joey, who he accuses of betrayal despite Joey's unwavering loyalty. Jake's pride and paranoia isolates him and leaves him alone and regretful in his later years. Jake's tragic flaw is his inability to connect with others emotionally. While he craves love and respect, his self-destructive tendencies push everyone away. His physical transformation over the course of the film mirrors his internal decline. A once proud fighter reduced to a broken man.
I like it. I think it's a good breakdown of him. He is what I love about movies, because tragedy in close up is horrible. You know, if you observe somebody in your personal life going through tragedy, it is unbearable to see them with those challenges. It's very hard to see them with those challenges
because it's in slow motion.
When you watch it through the lens of a movie, you can sort of sit back and digest it and feel all the feelings that you want to feel, but know that this person, you know, isn't now real. They're not in your life. They're not somebody who you know personally. They're not somebody having to deal with on a daily basis. LaMotta strikes me as somebody who I would struggle having as a friend or family member, most definitely.
He's just so overbearing, and it's like, as you mentioned, like this is ultimately a story about downfall, but like downfalls in movies, they always take so long. It's not like a car crash. It's like watching a really slow car crash, because it's like you can see everything just sort of unravel, you know, and things are getting worse and worse and worse. And we have those great moments when he first meets Vicky. We have like these beautiful color shots and color film of like their happy moments. And it's like,
we'll talk about that a bit. Yeah.
Well, it's like the feeling is like having those happy moments is like makes the dark stuff darker, because you have a point of comparison. And it's like these are just like every lovely normal family movies like you and I both have somewhere probably, but it's like those are so brief and kind of almost irrelevant by the time like the downfall is really in its catching momentum. And
let me talk to you about those family movies, actually, because I've done quite a bit of research into them. They are my favourite part of this film, and I think it's because it's portraying something that's quite important. So the home movie scenes were taken directly from when LaMotta gave the filmmakers his personal family movies. So he said, I've got some family movies of what I look like in that time. Here's some family movies that are in colour. And he provided them to Scorsese. And Scorsese was like, this is brilliant. And look how happy they all look. And look how perfect everything is. And it's also fantastic. So the importance of that scene is that it shows what the desired reality of what LaMotta wanted his life to be. So in the ring, success, snapshots of perfection. Out of the ring, though, you know, a happy and functional family life in colour. But then that reality is the rest of the movie, the black and white, the darkness, the sad and realness of everything. would you like to know an interesting fact about that part of the movie?
Go on.
So, I've forgotten her first name, but Schoonmaker, who was the editor of the movie,
Okay.
Martha Schoonmaker, I think it is. She, as part of when the movie came out, she would go round and watch the movie in cinemas and visit the projectionists because she knew them in New York. So she would drop in and just make sure that it was being projected correctly in the right aspect ratio, that it was all being shown effectively the right way. And she went in to just meet with one of the projectionists before showing, just to ask, and he was in there with the film, like cutting that scene out of the film.
She thought it was a mistake.
He thought it was a mistake. Yeah.
Right.
He thought that it was a piece of film from another movie, not from this movie. And you can see why he would feel like that, because he was expecting this black and white, like black and white angry boxing movie, and then there's this beautiful, color scene in the middle with
such a heavy contrast. Yeah.
And that's the whole point, isn't it?
We'll talk a bit later about how this film sort of challenges tropes, but it's the fact that the film starts off pretty dark. He's having arguments with his first wife and stuff, and then when he meets Vicky, this this angelic sort of looking woman in his eyes, and you see these color shots, you think it's like him turning a corner, that maybe it's going to be he's improving. He's able to balance his life, he's able to deal with this stuff outside the ring. But then, as we see later on, it gets worse and worse. If anything, it's worse than it was before. And what it feels like is that because he's so committed to boxing, he's abstinent. He performs abstinence between fights, because it's like he wants to, his style, which is just, as we mentioned, it's like this. It's just like rage. It's like he's almost like trying to kill the guys in the ring against. In order to have that, then it's like he has to go through this ritual of just like having all this pent up frustration pre-fight, which he believes gets him to win. So he does all these things to help him in the ring, but then I think the feeling is that by doing these things, everything else will sort itself out. He gets the wife, he wins the boxing fights, and things go well. But then it's like nothing changes. It's like it's not that simple. You have to put effort. You have to treat your family life separately if you want to have it succeed, rather than thinking of it as just sort of baggage, which is just dealt with and you can't just manifest sort of what you want to happen. His personal life. You have to actually manage it proactively, which he's unable to do.
I think he's also a product of his background and his environment. Okay, so his father was an immigrant from Sicily, and actually the way that his father paid the rent / mortgage on their home when Jake LaMotta was a boy was he would make Jake fight other children in the local community.
This isn't in the film, by
and
the
then
way.
he'd charge. No, it's not in the film.
Yeah.
And he would charge people to watch those fights, and then he would use that money to pay the rent.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we put a little bit. I know that Jake is a little bit of a dark character throughout this whole movie, and there's a lot of things that can be said. Like Scorsese, when he first started making this movie, the crew, when they first started making it, were like, why the hell are we making this film about this monster? He's a piece of shit. This guy, he's a horrible, horrible piece of shit. He's been in prison. He's had all these other things that he's done that he shouldn't have done. And we're sort of glorifying that. And Scorsese's response was, but we've got to look at both sides of this guy's story. It's important to look at both sides of this guy's story, and how this guy tried to redeem himself in the ring against some of the bad stuff that he was doing out of the ring. And there's an idea that maybe Scorsese, is quite a religious Catholic man, is suggesting that the in the ring beatings that Scorsese takes, so that De Niro's character as LaMotta takes, is an allegory for some level of like self harm that he's putting himself through throughout the movie. Think about that. Just go back. I know that we're skipping ahead a little bit with the timeline, but think about that final scene, that final fight against Robinson, when he's just sitting there getting beat the hell out of himself, and he's
letting it happen. He's letting it happen. It's like he's almost numb.
He is.
Like he's numb to sensations. So it's like it's like self-harm essentially. It's like, you know, he's letting Ray do this to him, but at the same time he's so good that he can't get knocked down, and so as a way of almost punishment to Ray for winning, he just lets him know that, like, okay, you won, but you're gonna know for the rest of your life that you couldn't knock me down, you couldn't do it. You know, you're not as good as me. I let you win, and like that's something which would eat at you, I imagine. It's like, okay, he won, Sugar Ray, but like not having, they had a couple bouts, you know, and it was like this was a rivalry, and he never wasn't able to knock him down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, actually,
so they fought 6 times, with LaMotta only winning once, which we see in the movie quite nicely.
Right.
However, it's recognised as the second greatest boxing rivalry, only ever behind Ali and Frazier.
Wow, gosh, I didn't realise that. Wow, yeah.
So it's and you're right. You know, LaMotta is trying to exert this dominance. The whole movie is about a level of dominance, a level of control, and you know, even when he's not in control of something, you know, and he's out of control, it's a constant like challenge of masculinity. There's a huge amount of their trust of issue with masculinity and power. You know, Jake needs control over his career, his relationships, even his brother. You know, he needs control over him, and that's, you know, he's got a really fragile masculinity all the time. Is that all that stuff with his wife and the local, you know, hood guys that she's like hanging around, she knows, and whether or not she's slept with them and all this kind of stuff that is, you know, it's not real apart from in his head, and in his head he's just going to completely self-destruct himself over all of that sort of stuff.
It's like he's like a product of his own actions, really. You know, obviously to an extent, as we mentioned, you know, he's been affected by his growing up environment, but it's like you feel sorry for the guy, maybe for the extent to which, you know, how low he gets, and like, you know, he goes from being, you know, world champion to doing stand-up nights at dodgy bars around the country, but at the same time, it's like everything that's happened to him was because of him ultimately. You know, it wasn't like something was done to him.
No, unless we could go back and look more at the growing up.
Sure.
At the time when he was growing up, maybe, but everything that's portrayed in the movie suggests it's self-destructive behavior.
But think about how a lot of films are rags to riches. You know, a lot of those guys, like Rocky, they have tough bringing ups. It's not like they had silver spoons. You know, it's not like they had it easy. They're able to overcome those challenges, whereas he can't. It's, if anything, it amplifies. He's like a pit bull. It's like the way he's been brought up has amplified his natural tendencies.
But I think that makes this one of the most real sports films.
Exactly. It's like,
you know, it doesn't end happy.
There's no fairy tale.
You know, we've got
ending.
so many of these things where it's like, you know, even you know, if we go back and talk about one of our other boxing movies with Bleed for This, you know, that movie sort of makes you feel like it's an uplift. You know, it's a rise, fall, and rise again. Yeah, and that he's ended up in positive situation, Vinny Pazienza. Yeah, but the reality, I think, for all of these boxers, unless they've been able to cultivate careers in the media afterwards, or cultivate careers where they've been able to maintain their money or have a balanced family life later, you know, this is the reality for many of the athletes as they get old. They don't know how to get old. They don't know who to become. I'd really like to talk about Joey LaMotta, Jake's brother and manager. Yeah. We see him coaching and managing LaMotta in a brotherly way, supporting him in and out of the ring throughout the movie, but also talks really plainly with Jake all the time. So, you know, whether that's relationship advice, whether that's what we're going to do, who we're going to fight next, how he's going to make weight, stop eating, you fat bastard. and all those kinds of things. But tell me about Joey LaMotta and what information you've got.
So, pragmatic and resourceful man who supports Jake both professionally and personally. Joey is the stabilizing force in Jake's chaotic life, often acting as a buffer between Jake and the world. Unlike Jake, Joey is more calculated and willing to play the game, even negotiating with the mob to secure Jake's career opportunities. Despite his loyalty, Joey struggles under the weight of Jake's violent outbursts and mistrust. Joey has his own sense of pride and dignity, which eventually clashes with Jake's relentless accusations. When Jake questions Joey's loyalty and accuses him of having an affair with Vicky, it breaks their bond. Joey's willingness to tolerate Jake's behavior reaches a breaking point, and he distances himself to protect his own well-being.
Okay. So, a question I want to ask you is Joey and Jake's relationship a bond of brotherhood that then turns into a bond of just family duty that he can no longer bear? Is that where we're coming from with this? Is that...
I think if the relationship lasted as long as it did because they were brothers, I think it's That's
so true.
I think you could argue that if they were just like, Joey was the manager of he was like a Mickey sort of figure from Rocky, just like a sign, runs the gym or club, or he's an agent or whatever. Like he's an external member of aspect of Jake's life. Then he probably would have unhitched his wagon and have been like, look, we're done. Like, you're just too much.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you're a good fighter, but you're just too much of a headache for me. But I feel like because they're related, it's hard to do that. You can sympathize with Joey for lasting as long as he did. And it makes you like appreciate like how bad it got for Joey to essentially just block all communication off with Jake and just be like, no, we're done. Like, I can't forgive you for that. It's too much.
It's I think the wave here of relationship wave is beautiful because at the start there's quite a lot of, even when we first find out about them, they're talking about who they're going to fight next, but he's also talking about Jake's first wife, Irma, and how it's crazy. He can't live like this and, be around this crazy woman and how she's no good for him and all these kinds of things. It's quite an interesting perspective. And it just goes to show how close Pesci and De Niro were. So they were friends before making the movie, and then when they made the movie, they lived together. They actually lived and trained together to sort of build bond even more. Gosh. Yeah. To sort of build that bond and sort of show it on the screen. And we can see that because of those movies that we talked about earlier, Goodfellas, The Irishman, Casino, all of those movies have also got Pesci in as well. So it's a continuing relationship that's gone throughout a lot of movies. I think this is possibly Pesci's finest performance of him being just real, super real. I love him in some of the other movies that he's made where he's the flashy gangster because he's fun and exciting. But this, he's just super, super real. And actually, there's a few like really cool and important parts of the relationship of them between them.
Was this their first film? It was their first film together. So you could argue that this performance of both of them and how they interacted with each other was sort of the reason why they ended up doing so much together.
Yeah, I think Scorsese saw value in it.
They're like, absolutely. We can't just like leave it at that. We need to have more.
Yeah, 100%. So, in the training scene where they're boxing in the Gleason's gym, which was home to LaMotta, Ali, and Roberto Duran for many, many years. De Niro actually breaks Pesci's rib, so you can hit when he's hitting him in the corner. Wow. You can hear this moment where De Niro throws this punch, and there's this, and it's because that he broke Pesci's rib in that shot. But also towards the end of the movie, when LaMotta's putting on all the weight, so De Niro, they actually shut down production of the movie for 6 months. De Niro went away and spent time in Paris.
I wondered how they did that. I thought maybe he just like pushed his gut out.
No, he put on 40 pounds over the course of 6 months.
20 kilos. What the fuck?
20 kilos by going to France and Italy and just eating and eating and eating. But he started eating during production as well, which is why you see him fatter in some of the scenes as well.
Sure.
So it was kind of different. But what they did during that 6 months was, Scorsese asked Pesci to lose weight, and you can see that in that final scene when they meet together.
Well. Yeah, sure.
And they hug in the hugging scene and the kisses, and it's like, oh, come on, give me a kiss, and all these kinds of things, and you can see the difference. And also in that 6 months, Scorsese told them not to talk to each other to make it more awkward.
Wow.
Which is just, this is
why
this is art. This is why it's art. James, it is gorgeous.
Just
so yeah, I mean it's absolutely fantastic, and it really goes to show you, that when you talk about trying to make movies, a lot of it is really delving into real relationships, real feelings, and going through the experiences, which is what De Niro said he wanted to do. So De Niro wanted to put the weight on. Talk to me about Act 2.
Act 2, Champions Fall. Jake wins the middleweight title, achieving the pinnacle. Like that. Jake wins the middleweight title against Sugar Ray, achieving the pinnacle of his career. However, the triumph is short-lived as his inner demons spiral out of control, as his obsessive jealousy towards Vicky grows unbearable, leading to explosive confrontations and physical abuse. Meanwhile, his relationship with Joey deteriorates after Jake accuses Joey of being too close to Vicky, leading to a violent falling out between the brothers. Jake's self-sabotage extends to his professional life, and his stubbornness and refusal to conform to mob demands isolates him in the boxing world. As his physical conditioning wanes, so does his dominance in the ring, and his paranoia and pride leads him alienated, with his career and professional relationships crumbling around him.
It's the turning point for this movie is feels really dark, because you go from having summer and beautiful shots and really nice stuff, and the new car and the burgeoning and building romance between him and his wife or second wife, and the good relationship between him and his brother, kids, and it just all really falling apart purely through self-sabotage.
Yeah,
purely through self-sabotage.
There really wasn't much like celebration in this film with when he wins the title. Yeah, there was no like lifting on his shoulders like, I did it, Adrian. There's none of that. It was just sort of like, I guess that it was signifying like almost like how, winning isn't enough for him. It was he did it, but like it's not gonna like tick any boxes for him. It's not gonna change his life that much really, because now it's just his issues are too far gone, and they've messed with him too much to the point where like winning, losing doesn't really matter. It's so anti-tropey, this film, to the point where like it feels unusual to watch, because it makes you realize like how much stuff and the lengths that filmmakers go to make you enjoy the film, to actually like enjoy it, to be happy when you watch it. That Scorsese's like, fuck that. This is not that kind of film. There's not a lot of color. There's literally no color, and it's just like
there's literally one scene of color.
One scene of color, and it's just like
absolutely.
This is the real life. This is the real world. This is Jake's life. You just gotta take it.
Can you see why this is when this movie is almost an allegory for what Martin Scorsese was going through at the time of his life?
Yeah.
Is that he was like, going through this...
No matter what good films he does, no matter what masterpiece he's able to produce, he's just clearly just struggling, then it's like substances involved. And I guess, I don't know exactly about his personal relationships, but what his personal relationships were like.
3 marriages at this point. Yeah, he was down to into 3 marriages by this point.
Wasn't good. Wasn't good, obviously.
He was a problemed person, a problemed and challenged person at this point, and that was evident throughout the whole of filming. So, cinematographer Michael Chapman and Scorsese fell out through the making of the movie. As Scorsese embodied the main character in much of his action, throwing tantrums, arguing with Chapman, even to the point of throwing chairs. Now, we covered Chapman in another movie, if you can remember, way, way, way back at the start of when we started doing this, because Chapman was the director for All the Right Moves.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, but he was the cinematographer for this.
Okay. Shit.
And so I think it's really important for us to see that Scorsese, when he decided to make this movie, this was his goodbye to working in big production movies in America. This was him saying, fuck you to Hollywood. I'm not going to play your game anymore. I'm going to make the film that I want to make and want to be remembered upon. And then I'm going to go off to Europe and I'm going to make really small budget art house movies because I've already made my cash. I don't need this anymore. I don't have to do this for your pleasure. I can do this for my pleasure. Yeah, because he's already sort of earned his fuck you money at this point, right? Or in his eyes, he'd earned his fuck you money. And I think that is why we got this movie, because what he was able to do was say, I don't want to make something that's happy. 1976 Rocky had come out, 1979 Rocky 2 had come out. He doesn't like sports. Scorsese was a kid who grew up with asthma, was really unhealthy, small, was not interested in sports, didn't see the point in it. Actually said that the reason that his disinterest in sports came about was that because the camera was always static whenever you watched it. Think about it. Scorsese growing up, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, he would have been watching football, baseball, boxing, and it would have always been the main static camera.
He watches it with his director's brain. It's like,
so then he starts watching it as an artist, and this is the first time we ever got a camera inside of the ring ropes. Everything else had been shot from outside of the ring ropes. There's even a shot later on in the movie, James, where they used a ring that was 4 times the size of an actual boxing ring, just to show, how, just to try and play with the perspective a little bit of the matter. So it was giving you this idea that the ring to him was so huge, it was such a massive place that he felt so engulfed by it and alone by it. But I'll try and find that shot for you. But you look at the ring and you're like, the ring looks really big.
It creates more distance shots, because when you're in a small ring, it's like you're right there in the boxer's face. But when you can give yourself more space, it kind of distances Lamar from us, which is what he is. He's not like us. He's completely different. He's fucked up. It's like we want to distance ourselves from Lamar. We don't want to be close to him. We don't want to glorify him at all.
Absolutely. And so this is why we end up with the movie that we end up with. And Scorsese was able to pour so much of himself into it, so much of his own pain, so much of his own disappointment, so much of his own anger. And you can see that in how this movie is being made, because he's able to say, this is what we want to show, this is the story that we want to tell, and we're not going to do this like it's Rocky, where it's happy and it's colourful and it's nice. There's a couple of reasons why it was shot in black and white. One, they didn't want to show the amount of blood that was going to be in this movie, because it was going to be probably more bloody than a lot of movies made at the time. They struggled to get the boxing gloves the right colour, because they should have been like black or oxblood in those times, and the only boxing gloves they would have been able to get were red.
How hard was it just to make some gloves? Just to get. I understand why they couldn't get. It's like if I wanted to make a film about 2000s football, like soccer, I wouldn't be able to get 2000s era Adidas Predator boots. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I don't know how easy.
Like T90s. I don't know. Like,
I'm not sure how easy it was in those times to do that, to be able to go and get something that was 40 years older.
It's like doing a war film, which you do from the neck up, because you can't get any uniforms that match the era. So it's like, okay, well, if we just.
I think it was something that stuck out to them.
No,
it stuck out to them, but they also worked out, well, if we do it in black and white, it's going to make you focus more on
the style.
It's going to make.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's,
Sure.
And even Pesci says that he prefers it in black and white. De Niro says he preferred it because it was black and white.
it makes you depressed, right? And it's like, and this isn't a happy film, you know. So it's like, you know, it makes it more entertaining almost when it's got color. It's easier to watch, certainly, you know. No, yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I think if it was shot in color, it would have been massively bloody, and you know there would have been huge issues with.
I mean, his last bit with like Sugar Ray was quite over the top, especially there was like on that scene spewing out of his head. You know, it's just like, what is this? You know,
that scene was shot to be exactly like, almost a shot-for-shot resemblance of Psycho, with the shower scene.
Wow,
that's what Scorsese was going for there. Scorsese was like, let's do an homage to Psycho here,
sure,
and let's have the death of this guy.
Yeah,
let's have him being murdered in the ring. Exactly, you know, really showing that sort of the cuts, and it was very much that was the case of it to do. This is quite a long movie, James. I think it's maybe 2 and a bit hours. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but there's only 10 minutes.
Yeah, 2.5 pushing 3. Yeah.
In the whole movie, there's only 10 minutes of boxing in the whole movie.
Which is really interesting because it feels like more than that. I mean, because it's not just like all the boxing is in one part of the film; like it's evenly spread out. So it definitely feels like it's comparable to other sports movies in terms of like the amount of actual sport in it.
There's some thought that maybe Scorsese influenced boxing itself in the making of this movie and how boxing was shot. So, maybe I might be wrong in this, but apparently there wasn't much in the corner shooting happening of boxers where it was like shot from the perspective of, say, the referee in the middle of the ring looking out at the corner at the boxer who was sat in the stool. Sure. But Scorsese was like, that's what I want to capture. I want to capture this idea that the camera is the third competitor in the ring. So he wanted to see all the time, you know, the camera's perspective of what was being shot. And I think that's really amazing. And he said it was really important because he went and watched some actual boxing fights. And he said that he was instantly struck by the action that was happening in the corner between rounds. He was less interested in the boxing.
Incredibly intense conversations. You know, it's like being in the middle of a battlefield, you know.
Yeah.
It's like shouting in each other's faces, instructions, feedback, blood everywhere. I mean, you get the classic shots of like, you know, wringing the towel. We'd say it's an anti-trope movie, but there's some stuff in it which you see in all boxing, like getting the sponge out, trying to cool the boxer down. You know, just it's like those are like the bits which it's almost like you can imagine like when you're a boxer, it's like everything kind of goes quiet when you're actually in the ring and you're just boxing because like you're just so purely focused on each movement you're making. About every millisecond is just, you're just narrowed in. You're not thinking about your wife, your kids. It's just complete focus. But then it's like you can imagine like this sort of when the bell goes, it's just like you kind of your body's in like is like processing everything because it's just like, right, well, I've just finished 3 hours of getting beaten up. Now I've got to like make the most about this in this next like 30 seconds. Like, what am I going to do differently next time? You know, what's my manager saying to me? Like, what's my, you know, you sort of evaluate like how much energy have I got left? Like, what's cut up? Okay, well, the vision of my left eye is now fading because it's all swollen up. It's like, you know, my rib is now hurt. He really hit me hard there. It's just like that. Those are the bits where I feel like you can really like slow down and have those really memorable like moments in films and stuff. You know, it's like, and it's just intense.
I've got a couple more bits, but so just on. The fight scenes, they took 10 weeks to shoot. Just the fight scene.
Wow.
10 weeks to shoot, which is insane.
That must have been that like one fight must have probably taken, they couldn't finish it on the same day.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
But still.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time to be spending on that. And I think about most of the movie, you know, a lot of the movies that we watch these days. I don't know how long Gladiator 2 took to make, but I don't think it took 10 weeks to do the fight scenes. No. Put it that way. which is quite an intense thing. So, yeah, I mean, we're talking about pretty intense shooting, pretty intense process for everybody to go through, but it's leading us to being in the best place possible when it comes to making the greatest sports movie of all time, right? Okay, we're going to talk about Act 3, okay? Redemption and reflection. Years later, Jake is a shadow of his former self. Retired from boxing, he struggles to find purpose, running a seedy nightclub and performing in stand-up routines. Overweight and estranged from both Vicky and Joey, Jake confronts the consequences of his choices. He is arrested for corrupt dealings, sinking further into disgrace. Alone in a prison cell, Jake punches a wall, finally breaking down emotionally. A raw moment of reckoning with his failures. Upon release, he attempts to reconcile with Joey, but the wounds are deep and their relationship remains fractured. The film ends with Jake preparing for a performance, reciting Marlon Brando's lines from On the Waterfront in front of a mirror. Though battered by life, Jake retains a glimmer of pride and self-awareness, facing the reality of his mistakes with a bittersweet acceptance. I think as lows come, the low of this movie being at the end is possibly the hardest thing to sort of stomach. Yes, there's a lot of domestic violence throughout the whole thing. There's a lot of really sad stuff to go with, but ultimately we're looking at the end of this movie as a man who's lost everything. He doesn't have a relationship with his ex-wife. He doesn't have a relationship with, his brother, his biggest and most important, defender and supporter. And he's no longer able to demonstrate his strength and masculinity through the thing that he was once good at.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so many boxers and so many athletes, they get to enjoy their retirement. I mean, there's not many true stories of world champions who sort of go through the just bottom pit. I mean, I know when Tyson Fury became the undisputed champion after beating Klitschko back in 2018, 19, maybe, I want to say, back...
Might even be before that. I'm not sure.
Might have been before that. He went through a really bad patch. Tyson Fury, he put on a stupid amount of weight, more than here, because Tyson's already a big guy in stature and height and stuff, but he was never like a lean cut fighter, and he just completely lost it afterwards on booze and drugs, and he would just have benders, with his friends and stuff, because he was just going down this pit of just like, well, I've achieved the pinnacle of boxing. Now what do I do? Now, Tyson Fury isn't as much of an explosive character as Jake, definitely a family man, but similarly has this sort of personal decline that Jake has. But just luckily for Tyson, he had a pretty impressive return to boxing. Probably against the odds. People probably thought he was going to end up in a ditch somewhere. He came back. So Tyson's legacy is pretty safe, I'd say. He's one of the great boxers. But, you can kind of say what you like or you hate about him. I think his resume speaks for itself. He's a good boxer. He's a great boxer. Certainly of the last sort of 10, 20 years. Jake does, and plenty of other boxers. Even like someone like Ricky Hatton, who had like a very brief, spotlight on him. Even David Haye, again, sort of has like a flash of success in his career.
Good long careers, but not necessarily the spotlight.
Journeyman boxers, in a sense. They stay around the sport. They get a microphone put in their hand. They're never going to be fun. They're never going to worry about financially if they can take care of their family. If they never seem to have dramatic personal issues out of the ring, which take a ton of the spotlight. Whereas like this is just, you can't really get much lower whilst being alive for Jake at this point. It's all, and like I like how you talk about the fact that it's kind of this bittersweet acceptance he has when he looks in the mirror. Sinatra get a sort of like did it my way kind of feeling of just like he understands that what he's done is self-inflicted,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like it is what it is at this point, So he's just got to, what happened. He doesn't really blame anyone for what happened to him.
I think he doesn't like the fact when he's put in situations where he's shaming himself and he's not in control of his own life again. The
Sure.
problem with he's got is that he likes being in control. So when the stuff happens with the underage girl in his nightclub and being in prison, that really affects him because it affects his ability to be autonomous.
Yeah, he's kind of like as if my luck. I thought just as I was thinking I was catching a turn. This happens.
And don't get me wrong, LaMotta he went into acting after his boxing career and was in quite a few movies.
Oh right.
He was in The Hustler, and a few. He was in like 15, 16 movies. Later on in his life, the guy lived until he was 85 years old. He did not do badly, so he lived a long and prosperous life.
Oh right, okay.
He was married another 7 times. He was married 7 times in total.
Jesus Christ.
But the thing that I think ultimately was an issue for him was that he didn't work out for a very long time that he'd been such a bad person. And that's something that happened for him at the premiere of this movie. So he was sat there watching this movie, and you imagine watching a movie of your life, James, and it focuses on your desires for power and masculinity, your challenges with your own trust and levels of betrayal, how you've pushed members of your family away, how you've ruined personal relationships.
Yeah.
And he was visually upset when he watched the movie for the first time, and his ex-wife Vicky was there at the premiere, and he turned and asked her. He said, "Was I?" He's like, "I feel terrible." He's like, "Was I really like that?" And she said, "No, you were worse. You were worse than that." And that's pretty deplorable. When you think worse than that, it's pretty bad.
I'd imagine probably like more physical, probably gave the belt a bit more, which is just like, can't just have every 5 seconds just him just laying at it. Kind of need to build up to that sort of crescendo thing. Talking about like his sporadic sort of decisions and his behavior and stuff, do you think he might have experienced CTE?
Massively.
Massively.
I think that this is somebody whose brain was probably affected by CTE even in his teens. I think
doing all those fights when you're still growing, and it's all that going on and stuff. It's
and you got to think he was a come forward, take punishment boxer.
Yeah.
Apparently he was great at rolling with punches. So as he got hit, he would take that punch and move with it. But it doesn't mean that he didn't take a lot of punches. I think
part of his strategy was sort of attrition. It was kind of like wear the guy out, let him just lay into you, and then when he's tired, he had long fights, right? They weren't necessarily 3-round knockouts.
There was I don't know. I mean, there was quite a few sort of like, but the bigger fights, the
because
ones
he
where
never
he had to
got
fight
knocked down,
good opponents.
Because he didn't get knocked down, that just means that he goes all. At this time, it was up to 13 rounds.
Depends on the weight class and depends on the year, but that sort of
over
region.
10 rounds and stuff, which is just it's just insane. Yeah, it's like I feel like if the film was made now, or if him as a boxer was in today's era, he would have gone through much more medical evaluations in his career to sort of determine, like, as he's fighting, what kind of damage he's doing to his body. And it also seems like the turnaround of these fights would be like a week or two. Nowadays, a boxer gets like 2 fights a year max. Really, it's like 18. It feels like 18 months. Every 18 months, we see like a Fury fight or a AJ fight, whatever. Maybe a year, or if they're trying to get, or maybe they have like a contender fight against like a smaller thing to sort of get the build some hype and stuff. But like at this time, it's like, hang on, did he say he's putting an ice pack on his eye and they're talking about a fight next week? I mean, like, if you're thinking about concussion protocols, we say 2 weeks, but then every concussion after that is like a month, 6 weeks, and after like 3 or 4 concussions, like you're done. Here he probably expended all those free concussions before he turned 20, so it's like, it's again, so, it's a real period.
You think about
piece.
this when he was, so he turned pro when he was 18 years old.
Yep.
Think about this from so first fight March 3rd, second fight March 14th, third fight April 1st, April 8th, April 15th, April 22nd, April 26th.
4 days.
4 days between
4
fights.
days.
And he went 4 days. But I think that was the idea, was they wanted to it was the way of getting money in. You weren't getting pay-per-view buys.
No.
The only way to get money in was by ticket sales
shares.
in the place, right?
Yep.
So when Madison Square Garden at that time only held between 16,000 people in the third iteration of Madison Square Garden at that time, to get the money you needed to fight a lot. And he did fight a lot. 106 fights with a overall of 83 wins, 19 losses and 4 draws. But James, that's not where this is special, okay? Because that's a pretty incredible career, right? You think, wow, that's a pretty incredible career, okay? Not in comparison to Sugar Ray Robinson, all right?
Fuck. Okay.
Sugar Ray Robinson fought 201 fights over a 25-year career. He had 174 wins, 19 losses, and 6 draws. One of those losses was the loss to
Jake
LaMotta. I mean, yes, at the time.
I mean, Sugar Ray must have. We saw Muhammad Ali, how the end of his life turned out. I mean, Sugar Ray's health. I don't know. Maybe Sugar. I don't know time about Sugar Ray. I get the feeling that maybe he was a bit more of a finesse boxer. He was not. Didn't.
It was a bit taller.
Bit taller.
But yeah, I mean, interestingly, his born. I'm sure we might be able to do. I think there might be a Sugar Ray Robinson movie. If there isn't a Sugar Ray Robinson movie, there blooming well should be. But he was born Walker Smith Jr. He wasn't born Sugar Ray Robinson.
So Sugar Ray's a pretty good name. That's pretty cool.
And born in 1921, died in 1989 at age 67. So he wasn't massively old, but he was a lot taller than Jake. A lot of things. I could sit and talk about Sugar Ray Robinson for hours. I've done a bit of research, and he seemed amazing, but renowned for a classy and flamboyant lifestyle outside of the ring. Was the originator of the entourage. Tried to be an entertainer, but he didn't do well, and then struggled financially until he died. He seemed like a really interesting guy. Don't know if he was a good guy. Don't know if he was a bad guy, but lived a life. And if there's not a movie about his life that's really good, then I'll be disappointed. There probably is one. I'll have to do some research. It's probably just called Sugar, to be honest, or something along those lines. So I'll do some research and find it out for us eventually. Okay, so what have you got for me in the line of tropes about this movie, James?
Well, we've got slow-mo, big punches, rolling with the punches. That's like, whilst this Scorsese obviously trying
That is a Scorsese trope.
But also sports movie trope as well, I'd say.
100%. Yeah.
We got some training montages. We got some, sweating out the weight in combat sports. There's a bit in the sauna. He's doing some sort of cardio to, get his weight down as much as he can, so he can, make weight. That's the issue when you're doing one of these, non-heavyweight divisions. Where the thing about heavyweight, you can just do whatever you want basically, as long as you're fighting well enough. But you have to make a really strict weight. He also changed divisions once or twice, didn't he? As well, he had to go from 160 something to 155 to get into a
So 155 was always his weight, but 160 was what he would go up to. He was one of those guys who struggled with weight a lot during his career, like a lot of them do. But 155 was his main weight, that's middleweight. But he did go up a weight class after losing the belt to Robinson, or later on in his career.
Sure.
So yeah.
And then, but at the same time, as we previously mentioned, it's because this is not a fiction film where you can litter it with tropes to to make it satisfy, this where you kind of want the character to go. It's like, this is a great example of how Scorsese wanted to challenge tropes and sort of like defy sort of films like Rocky. It's like whilst the film flirts the idea of redemption, it ultimately subverts the trope. Jake's attempts to reconcile with Joey and come to terms with his failures, it feels more like acknowledgement than true redemption. There is no real grand transformation or moral awakening. It's just a quiet acceptance of his downfall. It's kind of like, there's no like, they kind of hug it, but it's more just like okay, I accept what you did, but I don't really want anything to do with you anymore. It's kind of like, it's sad, it's yeah, I mean, it's not super trope heavy, the film, because I think trope heavy films that are trope heavy are almost certainly going to be more entertaining, because it's like that's why films have tropes. It's because they want to pass on these storytelling devices that make people happy, because that's ultimately what storytelling is kind of about. But this is more of like the purpose of this storytelling is to show the dark side and the reality of boxing, which is case by case. It doesn't necessarily fit in to an idea. Comparing this to Rocky, who's this kind of Rocky's the hero, right? Everyone loves Rocky. He's a working class hero, whereas here, it's like watching Frankenstein's monster, right? It's like,
I thought about that a little bit. Yeah,
mm-hmm. It's like watching Frankenstein's monster. It's just like, he is the example of, he is like, if there's anything tropey, it's almost like it's a real life trope as opposed to a movie trope. It's like, he is the archetypal scumbag boxer who is a real.
I would like to reframe it.
Go on.
Let's try reframing that. I think he's the archetypal warrior who can't exist in the real world.
A warrior in a garden, basically.
Yes, not a gardener in a war.
Not a gardener in a war. Yeah.
Amazing. He can't ever. He's like, he's shell shocked. He's like,
to be as good of a boxer as he is, he has to be like that all the time. He's incapable, and that's kind of the reality. It's like Rocky, like thinking about. I'm always hesitant to go too much into Rocky, because at some point we're probably gonna. I have a feeling we're probably gonna talk about it at some point. People thinking, like, why do they keep talking about Rocky all the time? But I feel like Rocky being the most iconic boxing movie of all time, I'd argue, or boxer maybe as a character. We'll say that. It's kind of like there's so many tropes in Rocky, and Rocky came out before this as well. So it's kind of like Rocky sets the benchmark of when we think of boxers and we think of boxers in movies, we think about Rocky. But actually, Rocky isn't quite. Martin Scorsese is essentially challenging this perception of what a boxer is by looking at sort of the ugliness that can occur from a boxer, and by looking more and more into his personal life and how, like, that you can't just have two split lives. You can't just flip a switch and be a killer in the ring and then be a really nice husband / father outside the ring.
Man, could you imagine Jake LaMotta having to try and deal with having a robot around the house all the time?
Here we go. You destroyed it. You would have genuinely like taken a bat and just started destroying.
Bring it over! Bring it over! It's already cooked on me.
What are you doing? You're gonna burn it. Oh my god! Did you sleep with my wife?
I mean, I don't know. I can imagine that robot's probably got some attachments in the modern day that.
Yeah. God.
It's dark. I think. I think we talked about this just like in passing before the start of this movie, in saying that this is the anti-Rocky.
Anti-Rocky.
And I think that Scorsese was trying to make the anti-Rocky. I think Scorsese was trying to say to everybody, "Oh, you think it's all great,
Sunshine
you think it's all
and
beautiful,
rainbows. Yep.
you think it's all just, even if he doesn't win, he goes the distance, and he likes what happens, and is not affected by all of this, but this is the reality.
Mm-hmm.
This is the reality of your heroes. This is the reality of your champions. These are the people that they have become, and these are the people that they will become." And sadly, I think that Rocky tries to. I think we could do a whole episode where it's Rocky versus this, but I think Rocky tries to go into the dark deepness later in the series.
Sure.
In five, and in Rocky Balboa, and in a couple of the early Creed movies. But it doesn't touch this. It doesn't even have a touch on this of how dark it is and how
it can't.
real
Otherwise, you're making a different character. You can't make that drastic of a change between films. When he's like,
Could you imagine if Rocky Balboa had been somebody who slapped Adrian around? You couldn't fall in love with him.
No,
you couldn't love him.
Really.
That's the whole point. There's no point.
And he
whereas Jake,
and he couldn't be such a celebrated personality either. I mean, Rocky's like a hero of Philadelphia. People idolize Rocky. They put him on posters. Before I watched this film, like, why don't I see like more like Raging Bull T-shirts and stuff like? That'd be pretty nice. But no, I don't want one. If I found one, I wouldn't want to wear one. I was like, I don't want to associate myself with Raging Bull. In terms of like, there's no way we can glorify and idolize Jake LaMotta really, unless you're able to purely look at his.
It was originally written by LaMotta as an autobiography, and then it was made for movies by Paul Schrader, and then a guy called Martin who went to uni with Martin Scorsese, and that's how they knew each other. Like we've already talked about how important this was for Scorsese's rebirth into making mainstream movies. How good it was for De Niro in his continuing career. How great it was for De Niro and Pesci to be making movies together as they went on. I don't think Pesci has the career he has with the big movies that he made alongside Scorsese without this movie being so successful. I went to try and look at a sequelizer or prequelizer for this movie, and it did have a loose sequel made in 2017. With a lot of actors that you'll know, people like Paul Sorvino and a load of actors that you'll be like, I know who that guy is. And it was terrible, really badly panned. It was called The Bronx Bull, and it shows you pretty much the before times and after times of this character. Mm-hmm. So it shows you everything that's sort of either side of Raging Bull, which is kind of strange, really. So it is a prequelizer and sequelizer, but it was terrible. So it just goes to show. If I want to make a prequelizer or a sequelizer, probably not going to work. A question we ask every week is, or we have been asking every week, is memorabilia lane, and which piece of memorabilia you would like from this movie. I would like I'd like one of the jumpers that the guys are wearing in the corner, the white jumpers with the black lettering.
Oh, I know it. Or maybe his leopard print like boxing gown could be one. That's quite
a nice one.
Kind of memorable, I'd say.
Is this popcorn or is it our house?
There's nothing popcorn about this.
Yeah, it really isn't. Yeah. There isn't really anything that you're going to watch in this movie for pleasure and enjoyment. I don't think. Even the boxing scenes, it's not like strangely, the whole movie's really just scored by classic opera, which is something that Scorsese chose to do throughout.
The contrast is beautiful between like all the brawls and stuff, and which also shows the ugly side of boxing, not just like the thing that goes in the ring, but outside the ring, the way it corrupts people because of the gambling and involved.
Oh, when Joey beats up Batsy with the
door,
with the door, nasty.
Yeah.
It is. It's violent. I think you're absolutely right. I think this one is pure art. It's beautiful.
Martin
it's gorgeous.
He forewent any opportunity to make this entertaining, to make it as artsy as possible.
However, I will say if you were going to pick out any part of this movie to watch as like a short YouTube video or a TikTok, those middle scenes of the boxing and the montage of this movie, the beautiful montage. That's
art. That's art as well, though, isn't it?
It's beautiful art.
It's not entertaining.
It's beautiful art. Yeah.
No, right.
Interestingly, when they shot that, the cinematographer, Michael Chapman and Scorsese were trying to do the shooting themselves. They're trying to use their little handheld camera to shoot it, and it was the shots were too perfect. So they started giving it to like young guys on amateurs on the set to shoot those scenes instead.
It makes sense. Yeah, very.
And then they intentionally like scratched them up and sort of desaturated them and ruined them a little bit, which is super perfect for me. So yeah, I agree with that. I guess really the sort of my last question before we get on to a rating is, I know that you've said you wouldn't want to necessarily watch this quickly again.
Sure.
But as did you appreciate it? Did you enjoy it?
I did. I learned from this. It's kind of like, I guess
that's true art.
That's true art. It's kind of like, like this is real life. Kind of. It's like a lot of these, combat athletes in combat sports. It's like, I've always been a big believer that, you can people who are skillful and stuff, it's kind of like there's a lot of variance in sports in terms of like background. Take American football, it's like you can be Peyton Manning and come from football royalty and stuff and like have a great career, and you could also be essentially a bum and have nothing and also have a great career, because you get. But I'm a big believer that something like boxing, you have to have a pretty tough upbringing, and you have to be in that environment that kind of creates a sort of monster. It's hard, it's hard to imagine even in today's boxing world. It's like it's hard to imagine a boxer having a really stable household, goes to good schools and stuff, and they just ended up being a good boxer because they worked hard. I don't see it being that simple. Maybe I'm wrong. I know
Floyd Mayweather is probably the perfect example of somebody who had a bit of silver spoon kind of boxing life. Yeah,
but like in general, I think it's even more MMA as well. Is like you get really like tough upbringings from guys. But I feel like that's sort of lost in films like Rocky, where it's kind of like they almost look tamer, and you kind of have this ability where they're gladiators in the ring and then they're nice out of the ring. This sort of says no, it's the same person, and that's the big takeaway from me. And it was like that was like what I really learned, that actually like it is hard to sort of have that balance, and really it's like. Not even if it's not from, it really rains home the difficulty of maintaining good personal relationships whilst you're trying to be at top of your game. Even if you're not violent, you can still be in a position where perhaps you're not giving the proper attention to your personal relationships. It's an example of how it's really difficult to have both things at once. If you're the kind of guy who's obsessed with a sport, when you have that obsessive personality like Jake LaMotta does, it's very easy to slip on your personal relationships, and this film basically shows how bad that slip can go and how far you can go from that.
So, give me a rating. Where is this sitting for you?
It's a champion. It's in terms of boxing films, it's like it's the realest boxing movie. It's in terms of sports movies in general. It's like it shows an archetype of athlete that can be, a guy who's just ruthless. It shows the dark side of sports in terms of like where an athlete can kind of go, sort of like the effects that sports can have on an athlete in a negative way, the negative effects sports have on athletes, and kind of how that can, the destructive path that can go.
I agree, and I think that we don't get this close to the destructive level of sport or the dark side of sport in anywhere near as many movies as we should see. I think the next one of those that we're going to experience ourselves is going to be another hyper-realistic director making a sports movie about another sport that can destroy people, but physically, mentally, all kinds of things throughout their careers, which we're going to touch in just a couple of episodes. So I think these are really important ones for us to show. It's a champion easily, not only through its cinematography, but also through its storytelling, its acting performances, everything. It's top notch, it's gorgeous, and it is comfortably sitting there with the belt around its waist, saying that it's a champion of cinema. I think this one brings us to a close, and I'm really grateful because I think I think sometimes I want to be able to show you some of these movies and for you to go through the experience of watching them and think, how is he going to take these in? And when they affect you profoundly, that's important. It's a good thing. And I think whilst it can feel like a hard thing to do, I think it's also a very positive thing to do, to look inside of yourself and look inside of your own experience as an athlete and a coach and all those different things and see how they're reflected in movies back to yourself. So I think that's really, really good, really cool. Next week, we've got something incredibly light, James, and incredibly fun.
Yes. Yeah, we're doing
much nicer.
We're doing it. We're doing the first American football film we've done since the program.
That might be correct. Yes, I believe that's probably right. Yes,
true,
the first of this series.
I'm
actually going to do a double bill of American football films to finish off this series.
Those two being very different American football films as well. So
probably the most different American football films that we can probably
find. Including my personal favourite sports movie ever. So looking forward to that one.
Little Giants, which is Little Giants, obviously.
Right.
Well, because you're a Giants fan, so why wouldn't Little Giants be your favourite sports movie?
That will come next week. That'll be a bit of a mood change from this one.
It will, and hopefully a family-friendly episode as well. So if you've got little ones who you want to watch a movie with, and you want to indoctrinate them into the love of sports movies that aren't about self-destructive athletes, drug use, and problems at home, you can watch with us Little Giants from 1994 and hopefully help them enjoy some of the massive and important tropes that sports movies can give you through the eyes of a child. Thank you, James. Really appreciate this one.
Yes, of course. And if you want to write to us, you can write to us at championsofcinema@gmail.com. And if you want to check out our socials, you can look at Champions of Cinema on Instagram and TikTok.
I hope people do that, because that's something that I want to kind of start working on a little bit more in the next couple of months. But James, thank you very much.
Yes.
Have a great one.
You too. Yeah.
And goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.